Pranam to all of you after a month or so of absence. And well, as the title indicates, you may imagine I just want to share some words regarding the reasons for TRIPURARI Swami's rejection of me as a disciple. I'm mostly recording a video because I've written a letter, as you may have known, which is 50 pages long. So I know that for some people to read that may be a little too much. So somehow I will be sharing some summary of that, which again, it's never the same thing as to go through the details I've tried to share there. Also, I'm doing a video because I've seen some videos of some comments of devotees mentioning that I'm having a mental breakdown and I'm like basically going quite crazy, and that's why all this has happened. So at least for you also to see my face, hear my words, and judge for yourself how much do you think I'm sober and so on. Because sometimes written words may do not transmit the same thing as just seeing and feeling a person in live, if you will. So I'm fortunately not having any type of mental breakdown. I'm not angry. Also, I do not plan this to do a cathartic overflowing him and pointing and criticizing and demonizing and polarizing. It's not my intention. It has not been my intention, and I pray it won't be my intention now or ever. I'm not here even like claiming justice or trying to play the victim. All this I mentioned in my letter. I'm just wanting to share with you my own pursuit of truth, what I feel is true, and I think I have some reasons to think like that. And I'm pursuing the absolute truth, which is Sri Krishna, and I think that in the pursuit of the absolute truth, all pursuance of truth in itself is valid, and I'm seen as a part of the pursuit of the absolute truth. So in the context of that, of trying to remain as truthful as I can, being one of the four regulative principal ones of these pillars of Dharma, I want to share with you just how some things have been going on, how some things have developed, unfolded in this last month or so, since unfortunately some of you probably have heard only one side of the story, if you will, or one version. And okay, everyone is of course free to choose whatever they want to hear and think as they like to hear. And they have heard probably what my former guru, Tripurari Swami, from now on I will refer to him as Tripurari Swami, since he himself has publicly expressed that I'm no longer his disciple. So I don't want to make him uncomfortable calling him Guru Maharaj. I will call him Tripurari Swami. So because of that publication, some devotees think have a particular version of me, if you will, but I would like to share a few extra facts with your permission. And also because in a situation like this, of course, many people also may end up projecting prejudice or sharing opinions without first being properly acquainted with both sides of the story, if we will, which I think is always very, very important and very crucial, as impartial as we can. And of course, everyone is invited to do so. Again, it's one's own choice and responsibility. But for those who are interested in hearing a little bit here, again, I'm not trying to prove myself right and someone else wrong, just to share my side of the story. And whoever likes may put everything on the scale and reach their own conclusion. So I will share some few words. I know that some of you may think that I shouldn't be making all this public. And to be honest, I've tried not to make all this public during the last month or so. As you could see, I practically disappeared from social media, being somehow a public person. I've tried not to be there because I was basically dealing with this situation internally and personally. I've canceled some of my trips, as you already know, probably my parikram to India, mainly because I considered at that time that the situation required my full attention, and I've tried to deal with that as fully, as comprehensively as possible, and privately as possible. I'm not trying to make anything public of this. I'm being very careful, even when I receive private messages, how to address that, because still the situation was in work in process, and of course I was hoping a particular result, which went in another direction. But again, unfortunately, today Tripurari Swami made a very strong public statement in my consideration, and I had originally planned to share the letter that I shared today publicly originally. Today in the morning, I made one post in the private Facebook group of Sri Chaitanya Sangha mentioning that due to how the situation had unfolded, I decided to take some momentary distance from my Guru Maharaj at that time and the dynamics of his mission. But my post was deleted from the group. So I posted it again, it was deleted again. Then I was removed from the group. And I was just trying to share with my spiritual family a decision that I was taking because I knew many of them were concerned. I wanted to know. So I just thought I will share that with them, this private group, not thinking about making anything public. And if someone would like to know more, I put in the message, they could refer to me personally, as to not make a public thing even in the private group. So I was planning, if someone will want to know more the details, I will mention that I written that letter, and only then I will share that with them, but not otherwise. But again, when I was deleted from all the things before I made any public thing, because it was not in my plan, TRIPURARI Swami made his public post officially, publicly rejecting me as his disciple. So then I had basically no other option but to share my story in that same manner, because I was removed from the group and so on. And many of those were starting to write to me, concerned and so on. So contrary to what maybe many of some of you may believe or may would like to believe, hopefully not, but I have nothing against TRIPURARI Swami. I'm not calling any ill feelings. I'm not hating him. I'm not in spirit of revenge or anger because of the post or because of how the whole situation unfolded, to be honest. And but I just want to put in context how things happened with some objective facts. I won't be trying to make assumptions and to project my own emotional stuff, but just how things happen in the timeline. Again, that I made in this letter in a detailed way. I will just here sharing a brief sutra-like summarize. So I would like to put something in context without being polarizing and so on. And as you may imagine, it's a pretty complex situation, like many complex situations in life, so many layers, simultaneous layers of complexity present there to harmonize, to integrate. It's not just one thing, one problem that can be explained or solved in 5 minutes. That sometimes I find the Buddhists wanting a simplistic, reductionistic way of what's going on and how to solve it, and press a button and everything is okay. No, that's not the nature of existence. Sometimes we need to deal with some complexity and paradox. So although the situation is complex, it's pretty challenging, as you may imagine. At the same time, I feel that the affection of Krishna is coming to my life in many ways. Krishna's mercy keeps revealing in so many interesting ways. And I'm taking this challenging chapter of my life to try to go deeper also into my life of prayer, life of sadhana, and counting with your blessings as well. And before starting with the timeline, also I know that some devotees may wonder, well, why didn't Padmanabha Swami listen to his guru and surrender to his wishes, even if he disagreed with him, and then maybe that wouldn't have gotten him rejected. But my point, as you will see, on if you take the time to go through the letter, again, things are not as simple as they may seem from the distance. And while surrender and humility are something very important and crucial, they do not necessarily always express themselves in the same way. When we say he should have surrendered, what does it mean, surrender? It's not something particular for every person in the same way. It can be expressed in many ways, and we should be careful not to projecting our own idea of what we think surrender is and how the other should be expressing surrender. Everyone is in a different situation, stage. Everything is totally personal and specific. So to be honest, in my particular case, you choose to believe me or not, I was trying to express surrender to my guru by asking the questions I asked him throughout this month, by insisting on certain points that I feel the need to solve for me to have a more clear picture of my relationship with him, so I could give myself full to him. I couldn't just force myself to do that in a blind way, if you will. So I was trying to surrender more to my guru by asking questions. In the Bhagavad Gita, you have pariprashnena, which means pariprashna means to inquire exhaustively, whatever. Yeah. So that's the duty of the disciple. But first, of course, one could say pranipatena. You have to surrender. But of course, surrender is not black and white. It's not that you are fully surrendered or you are not surrendered at all. So yeah, of course, there is some surrender to begin with. Then comes comprehensive inquiry to nourish the eventual surrender, and then the seva, pranipat, seva, and so on. So there was, of course, some degree of saranagati that I've tried to offer to my former guru. And on top of that, there were some questions to foster and nourish that initial saranagati into an upgraded version of that saranagati. So, how to say? For that, I've basically tried. I was, yes, as the idea says, I disagreed with something, and I was dealing with something I was disagreeing with for almost a month, without saying anything publicly, without denouncing that, or anyhow trying to harmonize that, trying to deal with that, to be honest. But again, at the same time, surrender cannot be just like a blind dogmatic following, just shut up and put your head on the ground and don't think and don't feel and continue. And for me, guru disciple relationship has to be a back and forth of trust and affection. And I've tried to present my questions in that context. So for me, of course, the disciple is invited to inquiry. So surrender is is in such a way that surrender may be voluntary and informed. If there's no deep inquiry with sincere intention, with sincere desire, again, probably once surrender is just an external thing, or some type of, how to say, mediocre blind following. So the following points that I will share with you today, that I present to Tripurari Swami, were actually presented in that spirit, although it has not been declared as such, that what I'm doing is not Guru Seva. But again, Guru Seva is not something external in particular, but what's the internal intention. And sincerely, that was my intention. And not only the intention, but again, you can take your own decisions. So most of my questions were not addressed, unfortunately, by him or by his close associate. Actually, most of my questions were unfortunately minimized and downplayed to the point of today's present situation, which led into all these dynamics. So to begin with, I will again share a brief summary of the document, the letter I've shared, 50 pages are, which is detailed and it's not lengthy for the sake of lengthiness, but it's, again, so complex situation, so many layers for a whole month. So you need to enter into some details. So I'll try to make that as short as possible, although you don't believe me. So I recommend, if you have the time, to go through the document. And of course, I'm open to speak and to share my thoughts and feelings with everyone who may be interested in speaking about that, of course, openly, sincerely. So where to begin in the timeline? Well, as you know, I have recently published one book. I mean, it's also more than half a year. But I began writing that book, Inherent or Inherited, like 2 years ago or more. So the whole process of that was there. And eventually I got to know that my god sister, Brindaranya, my guru, my former guru's closest disciple, who lives with him for the last 30 years or so. I don't know her, basically, but I know how close she is to him. So she started to write a series of articles which were going in another direction, the direction that possibility of bhakti is inherent and bestowal was simultaneous. So eventually I came to know about that. And to be honest, and again, I put my hand in my heart and you choose to believe me or not, I was open to change my perspective and to even accept that my book was maybe totally wrong, or at least there was some form of complementary work that helped the other work to come. And I spoke with my Guru Maharaj about that, about how to deal with the situation, how to deal with the philosophical differences. For example, we have one meeting in Poland that my former Guru, Tripurari Swami, refers quite often in his recent conversations. But actually, in that meeting in Poland, the agreement was, okay, the situation is awkward. I'm publishing a book that my guru at that time was not already agreeing with, but it's already there. and it's creating some awkward situation, how to deal with that. And he also spoke, we can have two stances in the mission, no problem. So for me, that was great. But he asked me, let's try to deal with the awkwardness of the situation. He asked me to deal with the awkwardness of the situation in the service of in my service. And for me, that was a great service. I felt inspired by that. And I say, okay, I'll deal with the awkwardness that comes from the philosophical differences. That was the point in that Polish meeting we had. Whatever differences come out of philosophy, try to deal with that awkwardness. Because at that time, I didn't have a clue which were Brindarani's articles about. I never basically read them at all. She didn't communicate with me in that whole year. So we agree with that. But the point is that, as you will see, my differences with her presentation has nothing to do with the philosophy. I didn't know even what's her presentation about because I never read past beyond the first article. So I make this point here. The deal here is not the philosophy. The problem is here is not two different Siddhantic stances. Again, I'm open to change mine, and I'm not aware what's hers. So the situation unfolding because of something else. So eventually her article was published. And again, I'm summarizing here. If you're going to go to the details, you go to the document. And I feel that Brindarani in that article was speaking quite strongly about me, with all respect, not taking that personally, but just as a fact. And she especially spoke strongly about how I treated Sundar Gopal, who, in my reply, in a series of articles I made in reply to two presentations that he gave before, in which he spoke quite strongly about me, to be honest, in both of them. Although he expressed that he loved me in the first podcast with Navras, eventually he started to speak very strongly about my points, quoting over and over again the names of my articles in the harmonies that I published at that time and the concept I used there, mentioning my name in the first podcast. And again, I'm not saying this to demonize Sundar Gopal. I'm just saying, and he told me in private then, I was not against you, Maharaj. And I say, I believe you, but please make a public clarification of that, because I have many devotees writing to me, asking me why Sundar Gopal spoke so strongly, and many of your followers publicly in online forums demonizing me and saying I was a danger to the Sampradaya and so on. So that was first. And then came my reply to him in somehow strong words. Because also what he was, if you will, speaking against in his presentation was what my Guru Dev at the time will think as the Siddhanta, and that Bhakti was not inherent. So actually, although Sundar Gopal mostly spoke about me, I felt that ultimately applies to my Guru Dev, and I felt the inspiration to reply strongly because he spoke strongly. So anyhow, that's one layer of the situation. So my point is that what I wrote to Sundar Gopal in my series of articles, I shared them with my Gurudev at the time, with my TRIPURARI Swami, and he supported that. But that will go there eventually. So Brindarani spoke strongly about me and my presentation in her first article, and then in a Facebook thread that came another thing, but we will see that eventually. But in the context of this, TRIPURARI Swami fully supported Brindarani's presentation and tone of the presentation, not the philosophical, of course, the philosophy as well, but also the way, the how. So many devotees felt quite disturbed by Brindarani's first article in our Sangha, and also in other Sanghas as well. They wrote to me, and Bhaktirasa, a god sister of mine, or a disciple of Tripurari Swami, I could say now, she published in the Sri Chaitanya Sangha Facebook group, and many commented there something that she expressed her like difference of opinion strongly, including Brindaranya commented there as well. And then while commenting in that thread, Brindaranya further unfold that I was acting against Vaishnava decorum or behaving independently of my Guru Maharaj instructions, or misrepresenting my guru, sullying the reputation of the Sangha like never before. Like I've downplayed Bhaktivinoda Parivar by eroding people's faith in Thakur Bhaktivinoda, and things like that on that level. So, and I was simultaneously in Colombia in the midst of a retreat, the Japa retreat. So I was quite busy with devotees and dynamics there, and seeing that all this was unfolding, and I didn't immediately reply to anything of that. I preferred to take some days to think, pray, and process what was going on. And I'm saying this because eventually, unfortunately, it was mentioned by Tripurari Maharaj that there was a whole conspiration behind Bhakti Rasa's post in that Facebook thread, when actually she herself chose to publish that. She shared that with me, the idea, and she told me, should I publish this in the Facebook group or in the harmonies? And I say, better in the Facebook group, which is private, and so we don't make it this uh, public. But you think if you want to publish or not. I'm mostly preferring to keep a distance. And I've included those quotes in my letter that are all registered. So there were no group conspiration behind Bhakti Rasa's post. So then my Tripurari Swami asked me how I feel. He sent me an email a few days after that, how I feel with Brindarani's article. So I replied to him in a detailed email, lengthy email, expressing in detail how I was feeling basically. And his basic reply at that point was that that I should share all those things in the Facebook thread that was there. Mm. Uh, so I did that, and it seems that he never read my reply in that Facebook thread, at least till recent days. So he was also not fully informed to how I replied to Brindaranya there. So Brindaranya then replied to what I said, and anyhow, mentioning that actually my Guru Maharaj knew, uh, my Guru Maharaj did not know about my reply to Sundar Gopal. And I mentioned to her that yes, he actually went through that, and I shared some screenshots of the email exchange we had. But again, she didn't reply to that. And I mentioned this because also Tripurari Swami, he said that later he will express that he felt that I abused his trust by me not acting as we have accorded in Poland. But the point is that in Poland we accorded that I will deal with the awkwardness, the philosophical awkwardness that will come from Brindarani's presentation, not by the way she mistreated and misrepresented me, both in the articles and in the Facebook thread, which at that time I didn't have a clue because I never read anything. So that's, I think, an important point to bear in mind. And again, with this, I'm not trying to downplay anyone and point and demonize, just to share the facts, if you will, and you can reach your own conclusions. Mm. Regarding Sundar Gopal, of course, I felt that after all this, there was some distance between the two. And I tried to write to him at one point, but because I tried to write to him in Facebook and he blocked me there. So I sent him an email, but there was no reply. And again, I'm not holding any bad feelings toward him. I understand that the situation was intense for him and for me as well. But again, I'm trying to make this clear that I'm not here trying to hold to anger and resentfulness and so on. And sorry that if all this sounds like a Mahabharat, another Mahabharat saga for many of you. Sorry for that, but there are many details to keep with. So basically, as I told you, Brindarani, this thread basically didn't address my main points. And then after that unfolds almost a 1 month back and forth between myself and Tripurari Swami, as well with other devotees. All this explained in detail in my document, sharing different direct statements in those changes. So trying not to just filter what I think, what I feel, but what was said. So then Tripurari Swami gave a Swami call, which is a Sunday call that he always gives, like a lecture about supposedly addressing the issue. And he shared a timeline of how he changed his philosophical stance on the issue. But also he shared some inaccuracies in that call regarding, again, not with bad intention, but it was just inaccurate. Like, for example, he said that he never read my replies to Sundar Gopal before I published them, which that's not true. And I shared the screenshots where he acknowledged that in email, or that Brindaranya's attitude or reply toward me was a standard academic approach to the matter, or he said that I didn't reply to him during that type of the initial Facebook thread, but I actually replied to him. So some things that are basically technically inaccurate. Again, I'm not saying bad intention. I'm not just trying to project any emotional filter, but just keeping to the facts, if you will. And then comes a video call that we organized between me and Tripurari Swami and Brigupad, disciple of Tripurari Swami, who acted as a moderator since the situation was somewhat tense at that time between us two. And before the call, like half an hour before the call, I couldn't just it was not in my plan, but I started crying uncontrollably because of all that I was dealing with internally. And again, not playing the victim, just like, well, I think I'm a human and we have feelings. So I started at the very call crying as well, like for half an hour. I couldn't almost speak too much, but that was what I had to say at the moment. And it was a nice call. Both of us expressed our feelings for one another and affection for one another. Which, to be honest, I still have affection for Tripurari Swami. Again, I'm not feeling that he's bad. He's I don't know. I hate him or something like that. Although, of course, the whole situation is quite challenging, and I'm still praying to see how to properly integrate all that. But again, my present feeling toward him or toward anyone is not that of enmity or bad feeling. I don't want to carry that baggage with me at all. I don't want to enter into that ego blame game, to be honest. So, well, in that call, also Tripurari Swami told me that there was nothing that he would like more than to see me and Brindaranya getting along together. And he then told me, and I know you are willing to do that, but she's not. So, and again, with this, I'm not pointing to her, just what he told me. And I took that as his desire. Okay, he will like that to happen. So I try to communicate with her later, as you will see. Also, in that call, he recognized that he was biased towards Brindaranya. Also, I made clear to him that we needed to continue talking. It's not that this call was the final solution to everything, and he acknowledged that. He agreed with that. But then I spoke again to him like 2 days after, and I expressed my need for further resolve. And he expressed surprise that I thought that everything was not resolved yet. When he himself agreed 2 days before that there's need for more talk. I expressed that and he agreed. So from that on, he told me, better you continue speaking with Brigupad Prabhu. I need a break from all this. So then I switched to Brigupad Prabhu and we continue speaking about that. And the devotees of the Sangha had a Zoom call without me, without Tripurari Swami, but with Brigupad as a moderator. And the idea was that the devotees will have a place to express their feelings and their necessities or whatever. And then Brigupad will compile a gist of that and present that to Tripurari Swami. And he said that the result, the gist of that was that the devotees felt the need for Tripurari Swami to publicly express his appreciation for me. And he promised that through a message that was sent by Prabhupada in a message that was sent to those who were there. He said, I will promise that I will express that in my next Swami call, the other day, I think it was. But then in that Swami call, he spoke for 1.5 minutes. The only thing that was said there was that I have a different perspective from Padmanabha Maharaj, and those who would like to know my perspective can contact me privately. That was what he said. So he didn't say anything other thing he promised he will say, basically. That was somewhat confusing for many. So then I remember my Tripurari Swami told me, there's nothing I would like more than to see you getting along with Brindaranya. So I wrote to her, trying to please his desire, to be honest. And we started some nice exchange of emails for a few days. And at one point, Tripurari Swami shares with Bhaktirasa a list of points that Brindaranya sent to Tripurari Swami, and Bhaktirasa sent that list to me. Then Brindaranya didn't want Tripurari Swami to share that, but at that time Bhaktirasa already shared it before he told us not to do. He told her not to do. So in that list, Brindaranya basically mentions a whole list of points that she says that I implied and directed to her in my reply to her in the Facebook thread. What she feels that I'm criticizing her, were actually all those things that she feels I'm telling to her. I was actually mentioning them in relation to me in that letter. And all of this is in the document I'm sharing. Now, to give you an example, the first one, that Brindaranya said that I implied that she's carried by victim consciousness, blame games, and creating false enemies outside of her own undisciplined mind. Now, if you go to the original letter I wrote, when I was saying there was, before starting to write this letter, I'm praying myself, trying not to be carried myself by victim consciousness, blame games, creating false enemies, and so on, because I know that can happen. So I'm praying not to do so. I was never telling she is doing that. I was just saying, I pray not to do that myself. But she took that and many other points, like 10 almost, like assumptions, like I was referring to her. Again, I'm not saying she did that with bad intention. Maybe she was not even aware that was happening, but that was a fact. I was not saying that to her. Mhm. So I shared those points to her, uh, and telling, to be honest, Brindaranya, dear Brindaranya, I'm sharing this, trying to not incur myself into those things. And I told her, in the same way you are assuming that I'm saying this to you, probably the same way you assume that some of the things I was saying in my reply to Sundar Gopal were directly towards him, where actually there were more general statements. So anyhow, I sent that to Brindaranya, that email, for in the context of our exchange, and she tells me that after speaking with Tripurari Swami, he decided that it will be better that we stop our communication between her and me, and from now on, I should continue speaking with Guru Nishta, who is Brindaranya's husband, who lives also with Brindaranya and Tripurari Swami in their ashram in California, Odari. So from now on, Guru Nishta will be Tripurari Swami's emissary. So when we spoke with Guru Nishta, he told me, my plan is to hear, Maharaj, everything you have to tell me, and I will hear all that you have to say, all the talks that it may take, and only after that, I will compile that, I will think about that, and then I will share that material to Tripurari Swami, and he's open to change his stance if that's if whatever we shared inspires him in that direction. And then in one of the calls, again, I'm summarizing here in the document, there is quite more detail of all that. So in the second call I have with Guru Nishta, we had two. He asked me, what do you think, Maharaj, will be the ideal result of all this? What should happen for everything to be harmonized? And I told him, personally, it's not that I think that I don't want my ego to be appeased and people apologizing and falling to my feet publicly. I'm just in need as a disciple, Guru Nishta, to be honest, I'm in need to see my Guru addressing some situations that I'm presenting to him, some points, some questions that I need that he addresses, so I can really clear my doubts and continue increasing my dedication to him, because doubts get in the way. You like it or not, that's the opposite of faith, if you will, in one way. So that will be the thing that for me personally will be what I need to see. I'm not even expecting Brindaranya to say something public, but at least from my guru to see some certain stance that I need. It's my situation I need, and I'm not like demanding that, but I'm praying, please, these are my questions. No, and I think that relationship with guru disciples, it totally is based on also disciple presenting questions and guru addressing them. So anyhow, uh, also on that side, that, and also say, but also considering what others may need, and also how the whole situation unfolded, not only on the private Facebook group, but also on the harmonies publicly and on private messages. I think that some recognition on those levels and platforms also will be good. As I mentioned, Brindaranya having misrepresented and mistreated me basically in the, again, not with bad intention, but that happened in the article, in the Facebook thread, eventually in the list of points that I mentioned. And Tripurari Swami giving full support, public support to Brindaranya without him having full information from my side, for example. At that time, he said he never read my Facebook reply to her. He never went through Sundar Gopal's second presentation about me, where the one that he spoke even stronger. So, and while doing all this, I've been told constantly trying to separate relative and absolute side of the guru, relative and absolute side of the guru, trying to say, okay, this has to do with the relative aspect, but I need to, it's that relative side is getting in the way of my absolute side of my faith in him, in that sense, my absolute side. So that needs to be addressed. I need that to be addressed. But I was trying to make this separation so the faith could remain as intact as possible. So then I have a second call with Tripurari Swami, which went well. Again, it was a nice call, and he invited me to reflect on the points we spoke and to share my reflection to him, which I did eventually in an audio I sent to him and I sent to Guru Nishta. So then I shared to him certain things that still for me were not clear enough, that I needed further clarity. Again, the complete list is in the letter, and that were inaccurate as well. For example, he told me at one point, Swami, those so-called senior devotees that supposedly support your situation, which again is not my situation, but whatever is happening, don't jump up and have psychological problems. Well, actually, I told him, actually, all the devotees, senior devotees that express some concern by Brindarani's treatment of me are not having psychological problems and all very serious with their sadhana and dedicated to him. Or he also told me they're like, those who support you do not know you that well, and that's why they support you, which felt kind of he's trying to minimize whatever I'm saying or whoever may agree with me. Or he told me that I speak flattering in a flattering way to people in my classes, and that's why people are following you and supporting me. Well, actually made me think that's not the case. I mean, if you hear my classes, many of you may know them. To be flattering is not my style. I'm not a flatterer. So that started to make me think also how much Tripurari Swami knows me, or is being informed about me from his own experience, or also by some other things that he may hear from here and there. I don't know. So again, in my letter, in my document, there is a link to this whole list, in the same way with the other list that I've been mentioning here. So also, unfortunately, at this point, what else? I remember speaking with Guru Nishna, and we had this back and forth. But at this point, remember, Guru Nishna told me originally, I won't be sharing where we are speaking with anyone before we finish, not even with Tripurari Swami. But at this point, I get to know that Guru Nishna was sharing part of the content I was sharing with him before finishing our series of talks with Tripurari Swami. So he was given half-baked, if you will, ideas and situations that were still not finished in our talk, out of context, to Tripurari Swami. And he was receiving that and being informed, half informed in that sense. So that was creating further mess, if you will, and distortion in the communication, basically. So in that context, I also I received an email that Tripurari Swami wrote to a disciple of his who is an old friend of mine from Argentina from more than 15 years ago. And this friend wrote to him expressing that he felt disturbed at the way Brindaranya spoke about me publicly. Tripurari Swami replies to this devotee friend of mine that basically that she's okay and I'm wrong, and I am someone who is disobeying his guru, among other things. I'm sharing all those things in the document. So all this is being done, if you will, behind my back to someone who knows me for so long, who is expressing some confusion. So I start to get more confused, as you may imagine. So I write then to Guru Nishta and ask him we established some rules of engagement in the beginning of our conversation that you will share my conclusion only after we finished. Why you have transgressed that and shared those things with Tripurari Swami before? Until today, he has not replied to me that. And then he told me, replying, Tripurari Swami wants to have a call with you. But of course, at that time, I was feeling awkward, and I told Guru Nishta, first I need to finish my conversation with you instead of being switched to another conversation and another conversation. Remember, I was speaking first with Tripurari Swami, then he told me, from now on, don't speak with me about this, go to Brigupad. Then I started speaking with Brindaranya, and at one point, Tripurari Swami told me, from now on, that conversation is canceled. Now you go to Guru Nishta. Now I was speaking with Guru Nishta, and now he's telling me, no, now you have to speak with Tripurari Swami. So every time we were getting somewhere in the conversation was somehow canceled. So I was somehow frustrated with that also. I like to have proper communication about things. I know that good communication can avoid so many problems. And I think a big part of this problem is because there has not been proper communication. So I told Guru Nishta, I prefer to conclude my conversation with you. I'm asking some questions instead of being switched back again to Tripurari Swami, and then I can speak with him. But unfortunately, that has been presented as I didn't want to speak with Tripurari Swami, but that's not the context. So what else? Simultaneously, some of the senior most members and most committed members of the Sangha were writing to Tripurari Swami, one of them being Bhakti Rasa, among others, and about how I was trying actually to ask some questions to him. I was not arguing against him. I was not having any bad intention against him of his mission or his mission. I served his mission for the last years, trying to nourish the faith of this devotees in him. And I don't want to play the saintly and the nice guy. I really sincerely try to do that. with all the mistake that it included, but that has been my intention. And while doing all this, I've tried to do the same. I have no other secret agenda in mind or anything. And Bhaktiras and others were presented to Tripurari Swami, but Manavash is sincerely in need of having his questions addressed. But they are being constantly dismissed, misrepresented publicly, his person. And Tripurari Swami replied that till that day, he thought that everything that Brindaranya did was okay, basically, and that I abused his trust by not reacting properly when Bhaktarasa made that post in the Facebook thread, in the Sri Chaitanya Sangha Facebook group. But remember, I did not react properly because he was expecting that regarding the Polish talk, I will represent Tripurari Swami regarding the awkwardness concerning the philosophy. But this post of Bhaktarasa was not awkwardness of philosophy, it was awkwardness of human relationships and how one was treating one another and so on. And I agree with what Bhaktarasa was putting. So I was not able to say you are wrong because I felt yes, that has happened. That's what I share with my. And then Tripurari Swami say that I did not speak to him in time. But actually, I share with him a lengthy email after a few days after the post of Brindaranya. I was trying to think. Remember, I was in Colombia in the midst of traveling. So when he asked me and I had some time, I shared that in detail to him. And also in that reply to Bhaktirasa, Tripurari Swami mentioned that we conspired with other so-called senior devotees to make Bhaktirasa's post. And that's totally untrue with all respect. That was written by Bhaktirasa herself, as I mentioned before, and by herself. And I told her, you do whatever you want. I don't want to get involved. Although I agree with the content, but that's not conspiration. That's agreement due to some very clear facts. And Bhaktirasa herself wrote to Tripurari Swami and sent screenshots of the conversation she had with me at that time, which showed that there was no conspiracy whatsoever. Then he said, Tripurari Swami also said to Bhaktirasa that I've accused him while I basically presented questions that were not yet solved or addressed, but that's not an accusation. And then also he said that I betrayed him, which of course it's a little bit more intense, which till today I don't understand in which way that happened. And basically he said that basically this whole situation happened because of me. Well, I'm somehow like manipulating the head of people from the back. But actually, I've been basically mute during the whole month on a public level, and on a private level, you can ask the members of my Sangha. I was not speaking to everyone and telling things about this or that, trying to manipulate them or something like that. So then Tripurari Swami emphasized in one reply that actually I'm being carried by Pratishta. And he may kind of make that point in some further talks then, that actually a big part of all this is because of my Pratishta. And that he cautioned me about the Pratishta, and that I accepted to him that I had a problem with that. And of course, everyone has a problem with Pratishta, for sure, almost everyone at least. But the order of the phrases that he presented them here is misleading. I'm being carried away by Pratishta. He cautioned me about that, and I accepted I had a problem. Of course, I'm concerned about the Pratishta. I hope everyone is concerned with that, especially being a sannyasi, especially being in a spotlight position, public figure, representative of my Guru Maharaj at the time. I want to, not fall prey of that. And even I have asked my Guru Maharaj many times in the past, can I do more simple service, stay in Madhuban or in Aldaria and not being just the main face in one sense? But he preferred that I continue traveling. So I try to remove myself a little bit from those dynamics. And every year I shared with him my itinerary with my idea of journeys, and always open for him to change that or so on. So I shared, regarding Pratishta, I remember I shared with Tripurari Swami this concern in my very first personal talk with him, which happened in 2016 when I visited Audaria. And I was introducing myself to him. I say, yes, Pratishta is an important thing that I have to work in my life. Please help me. In a general way, not specifically. And he said, yeah, I will help you. But it's, again, the point is not that he cautioned me about Pratishta first, and then after that I admitted that I have a problem with this. Like, it sounds like I'm confessing my crime. Of course I have a problem with it, as almost everyone has a problem with it on one level or another. But here it's put in an order that seems that I'm confessing my crime. And interestingly, also, Bhaktirasa spoke with Tripurari Swami recently, and she shared that message. She has it in her archive. And she sent to him the message, which was not reply in that direction, that when they have the first round of this back in the spring, of this back in the last spring, Tripurari Swami mentioned that I had brought up to him and voiced to him, to Tripurari Swami, my own concern about Pratishtha during my first meeting with him, again, Darya. And during the call they had in that context, Tripurari Swami mentioned to Bhaktirasa that he did not consider my Pratishtha as a glaring issue for him or to be a problem more than anyone else. But still, he wanted to guide me as a natural challenge for any sannyasi or leader. So the point is that here this Pratishtha point is being emphasized in out of context, unfortunately. And then he almost concluded in his reply to Bhaktirasa saying that I need to come in terms with his perspective and I have to swallow it. That was the word that he used. And I really felt this is not how my guru speaks. Like I thought that he always said that in his own teachings. I want you to think for yourself. I want you to be progressive. I want not to just accept blindly. But here he was telling he has to come in terms with my perspective and swallow it. And as I've tried to explain above, his perspective was inaccurate and misinformed, as I have shown, by different factors. Not bad intention. I'm not trying to demonize anyone, but just all the facts were not in place. And every time I clarified something to ask further, that was not addressed. So again, in the document, more of these things are there in detail. And then he wrote to me similar things like the above, telling that I couldn't represent him, that in one personal, the last email he sent to me some days ago, basically similar things like the ones I mentioned, and that if I couldn't represent him any longer in this particular state that I am in, and if I desire to remain his disciple, that I should go to Argentina, chant 32 rounds instead of 16. And I had no seva. He had no seva for me in the US at this moment. And also, he also mentioned some of the points in his today's post, where he publicly announced that I'm no longer his disciple. So just to conclude, that's a little bit a brief summarized timeline of how we get to today's post. You can see something more expanded in the 50 pages document I've shared today. But some words regarding Tripurari Swami's post of today, that again will be summarized here for a minute. He said that I had broken his trust as a disciple, which again, this is mostly connected to how I, quote unquote, misrepresented him in terms of my reaction to Brindarani's first article, given our aforementioned discussion in Poland. But as I mentioned, very clear, the discussion in Poland was exclusively related to the eventual philosophical issues that may come. And as I have tried to show in the letter, actually, I have tended to follow Tripurari Swami's instruction at every step of the situation. He told me, okay, you frame your reply to Sundar Gopal in this way. He accepted that. He shared input to that. I followed that. He then said, you publish your feelings about Brindarani's article in the Facebook thread. I did that. Then he told me, you speak with Brigupat, then you speak with Gornishta. I tried to do that. You try to deal with the philosophical awkwardness. Till today, I'm dealing with that. I have no problem with that. He told me, try to get along with Brindarani. I wrote to Brindaranya. Again, I'm not trying to present me as a nice guy. I'm just trying to show what I've tried to do, trying to be doing this last month. So again, still up to this point, it's not clear to me which way I actually abuse his trust. Also, he mentioned that if I wanted to remain his disciple, he told me that I needed to increase my chanting and return to Argentina until further notice. Yes, of course, he told me that. But me as a disciple at that time, first I needed to receive certain answers and clarification from his side. And I didn't receive those things that and that's why I kept asking him. It's not that I was just challenging him or arguing with him or accusing him. I was just in need of some answers to nourish my faith. But his suggestion was try to swallow my perspective, which for me was not even clear what was his perspective, if you will. And then he said that unfortunately, instead of following my instruction, Tripurari Swami said today, he has chosen to mount a campaign in which he rejects my evaluation of his behavior and dismisses the spiritual consequence of doing so. To be honest, I haven't mounted any campaign whatsoever. I have not speaking publicly for a month. I've not been speaking in private messages in an inflamed way. If some of the words were asked according to my confidence in them, I will share some words here and there, but trying to be careful not to disturb their faith in him. And I practically, and regarding today's post, the one I made in the morning, I originally, as I already mentioned, planned to make that post to share this document. I plan to make the post in the private Sri Chaitanya Sangha Facebook group, not to make that public. But my post was deleted once, was deleted twice. Then I was removed from the group as an admin, and then from the group totally. And then Swami Tripurari made his post public. So at that point, I have no option basically but to share my story in public terms, basically, because so many devotees were totally confused, writing to me, what's going on? And then he said that I framed his rejection of his instructions. I framed my rejection of his instructions and disagreement with his assessment of my position as Guru Seva. As such, he has lost the plot, and I can no longer continue to serve him in the capacity of Guru. So, yes, of course, I framed the whole thing as Guru Seva, but it was not a framing. It was an internal framing that I was trying to conduct myself through. Because I have tended to present my question from that side, as I explained, Pariprashna, trying to inquire exhaustively with the spirit of receive particular answers. Again, that's the duty of the disciple. I won't start to quote Shastra in that connection, but that's the idea. Jignasha Shreya Uttamam, Jignasha, inquiry. So the duty of the disciple is to inquire, and duty of the guru is to reply comprehensively to the questions of the student, because to nourish the strata of the student. As Tripurari Swami used to say, the guru is the servant of the strata of the disciple. And of course, the disciple is the servant of the guru in so many ways. So although on the outside, it may seem that I kept asking and apparently disobeying, I was a rebel without a cause or whatever, I'm, again, insisted on this point, on these questions, because there are needs, and because Tripurari Swami was contradicting himself with some attitudes of things he said. They were contradictory from what I learned from him, in my particular case, in the last 15 years of receiving Siksha from him. So he taught me during, all this time through his words and example to be truthful, sincere, authentic, to present relevant questions, sincere questions according to the adhikar of one person, or to the necessity of the present moment, basically, to increase with intention of increasing one's surrender, to increasing one's commitment to the devotional ideal, to develop my own individual criterion, to develop my own progressive thinking. All this he taught me for more than almost 2 decades, but also remaining sensitive to my humanity, and also to the plight of others, and also to expect that the guru should teach by example, how all of us, guru included, should be students forever. And in that context, there's always room for improvement. So all this type of principles that I have imbibed from him from decades, I was feeling not totally absent, but in some way there was some contradiction there, and I needed to solve that. But that was, again, repeatedly somehow dismissed and downplayed. Again, not with bad intention, not pointing or criticizing, but just sharing my own situation and what happened. And God now, Krishna knows what's in my heart and mind. So that's my hope in the midst of such an overwhelming situation like this. I have hope and shelter in Krishna in my heart, and he knows which are my intentions and why I have conducted myself as such in this whole period. And while I was praying over and over again during this whole month to receive also the necessary corrections if I was mistaken, if that was required, but actually constant confirmations came that I should pursue all the things that were very clearly true for me. So, and besides this externally apocalyptic, if you will, a scenario, although as surprisingly as it may seem, I internally feel confident and sheltered. As challenging and complex as the situation is, internally I feel hope and shelter and lots of faith in Krishna sending this particular challenge, which, as you know, I'm just coming a few years after before this with a similar situation with my former guru. So somehow a similar challenge is coming. So I'm having faith that Krishna is sending this particular challenge as a very unique, specific form of mercy to move forward into whatever new chapter he has in mind for me in my life, in my practice as a Gaudiya Vaishnav, Gaudiya Sannyasi that I hope to continue honoring properly. So anyhow, a few words that I want to share. Sorry for extending myself a little bit more. This is just a summary of the 50-page document that you're invited to read. I will be sharing the link to the document into the commentary section here. And I pray for your well-wishing toward me. I'm always in need of the mercy of the Vaishnavas, of well-wishing of everyone. And I'm also, how to say, confident and quiet that those who know me and know who I am and won't misread me, won't misread my situation, my intention, or those who do not know me, they are always so invited to know me and to write to me and communicate with me and clarify any doubt. So basically that I pray to continue remaining in the service of all of you, with some of you maybe more close physical proximity, with some of you due to circumstance, some external distance, but praying to remain well-wisher and having compassion and empathy and understanding with everyone. And anyhow, if you need any further clarification, you can contact me privately and we can continue speaking. So thank you so much to all of you and keep in touch.